I'm going to start just firstly by quickly running through the agenda, which I hope you can all see on the screen here. We've got 3 key sections to tonight's event. Welcome and introductions, which is this section here. Moving into the kind of meat of the matter, we'll be exploring carbon footprints, so why you might calculate your carbon footprint, what carbon footprints actually are in and of themselves, and there'll be time for a short Q&A after that section. And then the final section is calculating your own carbon footprint. So I'll actually run through using Cambridge Carbon Footprints calculator, give you a demonstration and give you some, I guess, tips and advice in how you might think about calculating your own carbon footprint. Yeah, how you will use that as a tool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and do some proper introductions. So firstly, let me tell you a little bit about Cambridge Carbon Footprint. Cambridge Carbon Footprint is as I said, the organisation that is hosting tonight's event, and we are a small local climate change charity. And we're primarily concerned with helping turn concern about climate change into action. So as an organisation, we have a real practical focus. And what we do is we work to support people to reduce carbon emissions, usually in their personal lives, but we also want to empower people to take action and to lead on carbon reduction in their social circles, in communities, and in their places of work as well. So that's quite often what we talk about as being sort of climate leadership. So we work on carbon reduction, but also empowering people to be climate leaders. So some of the projects that we run that you might have heard of, the Cambridge Climate Change Charter, which was an initiative launched last year on behalf of Cambridge City Council. So the calculator that I'll be using this evening was developed as part of that project. And you'll see the options at the end there to kind of pledge to take action as part of the Cambridge Climate Change Charter. We're also quite well known for Open Eco Homes, which is an event we've been running for over 10 years now, which showcases sustainability in buildings. So what you can do to either build or renovate homes to be more environmentally friendly, more sustainable, more energy efficient. And we've also been very active across South Cambs with repair cafes as well. So along with a couple of other groups like Transition Cambridge, Cottenham Repair Cafe, we formed the Repair Cafe Network, which has been growing repair cafes around South Cambs, in fact, around Cambridge and the region as a whole. And we've also got a new project, which people probably haven't yet heard about, which is Net Zero Now. So that's a project which is being funded very generously by South Cambs District Council, which will help us to delve deeper into empowering leaders across South Cambs communities. So it'll be a training program to kind of network and train up climate leaders around the district. So I should probably also introduce myself at this point. Oh, actually, before I introduce myself, one thing to note, that if you enjoy tonight's event and if you want to support the sorts of events that I just mentioned, please do consider making a donation to Cambridge Carbon Footprint. We are a tiny organisation. We operate at the moment just with 2 full-time equivalent staff members. But as you heard, we run a lot of different events, dozens each year, dozens and dozens each year. And I think that we're an organisation that punches above our weight. So donations to us of any size actually have a great impact in the work that we do. So moving on to further introductions, onto our speakers this evening. So I am the host of tonight's event, and I'll be doing probably most of the speaking. So my name's Alana Sinclair. You might hear from my accent, I'm originally from Australia. I studied a Masters of Sustainability at Sydney University, and I've been working with Cambridge Carbon Footprint since 2013, so a good long while now. I got started working with Cambridge Carbon Footprint because my Masters of Sustainability told me all about the problems and how hard they were to solve. but I found that taking action and being part of an organization and practically getting on and doing something helped to bring a sense of optimism that was really lacking before. So I'm really pleased to be able to share some of that optimism with you this evening and share some of the things that we can practically do together. And I'm joined tonight by Tom. I don't know, Tom, if you want to turn your video on and wave your hand, say hi. I don't know, you can hopefully see Tom. So there he is. Tom is our Open Eco Homes manager. He is a CCF trustee. He's been involved with CCF for a very long time. So he will be helping to manage the chat this evening, maybe answering some of your home energy questions if you have any of those. He's pretty good on that topic, and many topics actually. So he might jump in on the Q&A. We'll see. And we're joined here this evening as well by Councillor Jeff Harvey, who's here representing South Cambs District Council. As I mentioned, South Cambs are the organisers of the Environmental Sustainability Fortnight, which tonight's event is part of, and they're the funders for Net Zero Now project. So in recent years, South Cambs have launched their own significant climate initiatives, both within the council and also in support of community action. So I'm going to hand over now to Jeff to say a few words about South Cambs and what they're doing on climate.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm Councillor Jeff Harvey, and I was elected in 2018, but after about 6 months, Councillor Pippa Halings, who's the chair of our Climate Environment Committee, asked me to join her on the committee as vice chair. It's actually been a wonderful experience working with Pippa. She's so knowledgeable and energetic, and it's a real sort of leadership in this area. Okay, I can start my video now. And of course, when I joined full of enthusiasm, because I suppose energy efficiency has been a sort of theme of all throughout my career as an electronics engineer. I think that's because I kind of grew up witnessing the OPEC oil shock in the 1970s, and it created this huge interest in renewable energy, you know, solar energy, wind energy, and then of course it took till quite recently for all that to come back again as being a real kind of point of interest. I thought, well, once I was on the committee, I'd be able to make a big change, but I kind of soon realised that, quite constrained in what we can do as a local authority. I mean, we'd like to be able to do much, much more, but we're kind of running up against, I think, central government being a bigger organisation, it's obviously sort of lagging behind where we'd like to be. I mean, we'd like to be able to sort of put more solar panels on roofs, kind of impose much higher insulation standards on new built houses and so on. But I'm sure that's going to come. We just, in the meantime, we all need to do the best we can, I think. I mean, perhaps the biggest thing, I think, as a local councillor and as South Cambs that we can do is to try and sort of bring people together. And I think that's what you were just saying in your piece, Alana, because the more we can sort of share our ideas, I think the better shape we're in once the kind of money is there to actually make these huge changes, which we all we need to make. At South Cambs, we're trying to sort of prepare the ground. We've got our Zero Carbon Communities Fund, which is helping to sort of generate interest within our villages, and that's been very successful, I think, and we're kind of ramping up to release a third edition of that this year. We're trying to show some leadership in the commercial space by our energy upgrade programme to South Cambs Hall in Cambourne, where we're putting in a solar canopy car park, a quite large ground source heat pump system, and that's going to reduce our energy consumption immediately by about half. And then once the energy intensity of the grid kind of continues to fall, we'll get down to about only 10% of our current carbon footprint by 2050. Obviously, we're hoping we can do something next year and the year after to make sure we actually get to zero, but that's how it stands at the moment. And we've also kind of given ourselves a zero carbon strategy. We're aiming for a 45% reduction by 2025 for us as a council, and 75% by 2030. And we're hoping that we can help South Cambs as a district to reach 50% reduction by 2030, and then all the way to zero by 2050. I suppose in my own sort of personal life, I've tried to learn a bit. I had an air source heat pump installed in the summer, and one of the biggest revelations from that for me was actually it really kind of was quite marginal, keeping up with the really cold snap we had a few weeks ago. And it was only then I started noticing all the sort of drafts in our house, and I just went through one by one, fixing them. And then, of course, I just kicked myself really, because we must have wasted thousands of pounds in heating oil over the years just by having these kind of stupid things going on. So, and I divested my pension. That's the other thing I've done quite recently. I'm very pleased I did. That's one of the biggest things you can do as an individual, I think, because there's a huge sort of leverage involved there. I mean, you're kind of taking quite sort of significant money and denying that to the oil industry to go and sort of start a new oil well somewhere in a pristine wilderness. And I brought a motion to South Cambs full council a couple of weeks ago, trying to suggest that the council pension fund takes climate risk into account in choosing future investments. And I'm hoping that's going to be a big impact too. So I think just to sum up then, the biggest impact we can all have is actually just by talking to each other and sharing our ideas, which is hopefully what we'll do this evening. On behalf of South Cambridgeshire District Council, I'd like to thank Emma Dyer, by the way, is an officer who's helped organise this, and Cambridge Carbon Footprint for putting on this evening. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And it's nice to hear that, South Cambs is doing what it can despite the difficulties. And nice to hear that obviously you've been sort of trying to do what you can as well. I mean, that's it. We have to put one foot in front of the other and, head towards those big goals. I'm aware that other people might have also had trouble with their video when they started. Please do feel free to pop your video on if you'd like. It is always nice to be able to see people. So if you want to and you're able, please do feel free to pop your video on. We will have some opportunities to ask questions, so do feel free to put those in the chat at any time, or if you've got any comments or useful bits of advice for other people as well. Sort of as Jeff said, we're all in this together. We've all done things already ourselves, so please do share anything in the chat that might be useful for other people. That's always really, really welcome. So I'm going to share my screen again. So hopefully you can all see that now. Does that come up? Yep. Okay, excellent. All right, so we're going to start exploring carbon footprints. One moment. Okay, so why we would calculate a carbon footprint, what carbon footprints actually are, and why we think they're useful. I mean, it's in our name. We think they're pretty useful, and why we think that more people should use them too. So why would we calculate a carbon footprint? I mean, it's a pretty big question with a pretty big answer, I would say. It's because we care. Eventually, at the bottom of it, it's because we care. Lots of people are worried about climate change, concerned about the impacts that it's going to have on nature, on the plants and animals. I think people are already aware that, the seasons are changing. People are concerned about the effects on agriculture, concerned about the world that we're going to leave for future generations. I know a lot of people are concerned about the impacts on our global neighbours and on issues of quality or inequality rather. And I think, there are lots of different reasons. There's as many reasons as there are people really about why we might be concerned about climate change. But the truth is that in the UK, we do care about climate change. We are very concerned about it. So 61% of Brits are extremely or very worried about climate change, and 26% of us are somewhat worried. And despite the pandemic, in February this year, 26% of Brits, so over a quarter of Brits, were still ranking the environment as the most important issue facing the UK. So that's behind only health, the economy, and Brexit. So, you know, overwhelmingly, really, despite everything that's going on, climate is still a big concern for people in the UK. And so, I mean, I think one of the key things that if we want to take action on climate change, if we need to reduce our emissions. And to reduce our emissions, at first, we really need to understand where they're coming from. And that's how carbon footprints can help. So, So what is a carbon footprint? Basically, it is a measure that sums up all of the greenhouse gases produced as a result of our activities. So you can calculate a carbon footprint of an individual good that you buy, or a service indeed. You can calculate a carbon footprint as an individual, as an organization, a community, or indeed entire countries. We can talk about, you know, the carbon footprint of the UK, for example. One thing that I would say, I mean, I talk about, you know, calculating carbon footprints, and, you know, we talk about having a carbon footprint calculator. One of the things that I usually point out is that actually carbon footprints aren't calculations at all. They are only ever estimates. We cannot know all of the carbon emissions, you know, from the production, the transport, the distribution of all of the goods that we buy. We can't know that exactly ever. All we can ever do is make an estimate. So carbon footprints are usually an estimate and a tool to help understand where emissions are coming from. The useful thing, I think, about carbon footprints is that it provides a framework to break things down in a way that enables you to take action on them. So when we look at carbon footprints for individuals, for example, we typically break it down into 4 key areas. So food, energy, transport, shopping. And these are all areas over which we have direct control. So we can understand where our emissions are most coming from, whether it's from we have a really high footprint because we, for example, eat lots of red meat and cheese, or maybe we have a really high carbon footprint because our transport emissions are really high, perhaps because we fly a lot. So by calculating our carbon footprint, we get a framework for analysing where our own personal emissions are coming from and what we can do about it. It gives us a baseline on which to measure our change as well. So we want to reduce our emissions. If we are looking at preventing climate change, we need to take action. So the UK government is doing, you know, is taking action. So, you know, for example, these are some of the commitments that they have made recently. So revising the Eat Well guide to talk about reducing the consumption of meat, installing heat pumps, ending the sale of petrol and diesel cars, and investing more money in public transport. And the big one, which was sort of alluded to earlier, was the government goal. So Jeff talked about getting to net zero. So the UK has set a goal of getting the UK to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. I mean, sooner would be better, but net zero carbon emissions by 2050 is the current UK goal. And I think the interesting thing to note here is that to get to net zero by 2050, we actually all need to be involved in that journey. So the Committee on Climate Change, who recommended this goal to the UK government, they estimate that 60% of the changes needed to get us to net zero emissions by 2050 will require change on an individual or a household level. So it's something that we all need to get involved in. I mean, if you think about those changes that I mentioned that the government's doing, so encouraging, more public transport, installing measures in the home, so installing heat pumps and ending the sale of petrol and diesel cars. Those are all actions actually that we as individuals or as households need to be involved in. And so calculating carbon footprints can help us in a number of ways. The information that you get when you calculate your own carbon footprint is personal. So, you put the information in as to how you live. And it helps you to understand the carbon emissions over which you have direct control in your life. And the hope is that you can then make the changes to your personal life that make most sense for you, because we don't, we're not all one size fits all. And I mean, I've stayed away here from sort of giving you what the average UK carbon footprint is, because in a way, what matters most is what your own personal carbon footprint is and where it makes sense for you to take action. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we've got time, about 5 minutes or so, just for any questions you've had so far. And when we're done with the Q&A, we'll come back and I'll actually walk you through calculating a carbon footprint using the CCF calculator. Actually, I can see one in the chat, and maybe that's for you, Tom.
Okay, so Ellen has asked, can you explain more about what a heat pump is and how it works? And so the usual analogy that people give, it's like a refrigerator, but in reverse. So with a fridge, it's making the inside of your fridge cold, and it's doing that by pumping heat out of the air, and as a result, the back of your fridge will be warm. And so it's on a larger scale, you have a heat pump which is pumping heat from the outside of the house, either from the air or from the ground, and it's putting heat into your house. And that might sound, why do you want to do that? But it's a way of really efficiently heating your house using electricity. And so often you might put in a kilowatt of electricity into your heat pump, but you can get a much multiplied, sometimes 4 kilowatts of heat out into your house as a result. So the fact that it has this very good efficiency is why it's so worthwhile. And with electricity decarbonising, it's going to be a great way to cut the carbon of our domestic heating. Well, we've got lots of other questions now. So Ruth Lambert's saying, has COVID lowered our carbon footprint for us?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. I think it depends is the answer. For some people, staying at home, means dramatic reductions in the amount that they're traveling. So maybe they're, driving much less. For other people, like myself, my carbon footprint will have gone up because I'm heating my home a lot more. So during the days I'm at home and I'm running the heating a lot more than I would. I'm also running, my computer at home, which I wouldn't usually do. So my carbon footprint has gone up, I would say. And it depends is the answer.
So Bethany Atkin is saying, how complex is it to work out the carbon footprint of an organization? I've got a calculator to recommend. I need to look it up. I'll write a recommendation in chat if you like.
That would be good, Tom. I mean, I think it can be complicated to do a carbon footprint of an organization or of a business, for example. I mean, if it's a small organization, you know, 1 or 2 people, a small premises, you know, maybe you're running a services organization rather than sort of selling goods. That could be relatively simple, you know, more akin to, say, doing a personal carbon footprint. But, you know, the more complex your organization is, the more complex your operations, the more complex it will be to calculate your carbon footprint. So there are, you know, calculators out there. So Tom obviously is going to recommend one. And there are also organizations out there who are, you know, geared up to help businesses and organizations to calculate carbon footprints, because it isn't, yeah, if you have a complex organization, it isn't necessarily going to be straightforward. But there are, you don't have to leap in at the deep end. There are simpler, you know, measures that you can look at as well. Yes, and Jennifer's put the Carbon Trust in the chat. They would be one of the first places to look if you're an organization wanting to look at calculating your carbon footprint, or look at other ways of sort of benchmarking your environmental impact. Do we have any more questions now, Tom, or shall we?
I think you're quite behind schedule, so I think maybe you need to carry on now.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and let me know if you can't see that. But this is the Cambridge Carbon Footprint Calculator. So I'm going to run you through calculating my own personal carbon footprint, and I'll give you a little bit of you know, my thinking as to why I'm filling it in the way that I am as we go along. So some things to note is that, you know, we have designed the CCF calculator to be hopefully pretty simple and easy to fill in, to be a useful way for you to calculate your carbon emissions pretty easily. But it's not going to be the world's most accurate carbon footprint, but deliberately so, because we want it to be really easy. You're not going to have to go away and get all of your bills unless you want to. That's a choice. So you can make it as easy or as complicated as you would like. And if you fill it in, you know, without going and getting your bills, you'll get a rough and ready calculation, but that should hopefully be enough to actually give you some information to act on. So let me get started by actually popping in some of my details. So I own my home, and we do have an EPC certificate. Well, yeah, an EPC. So you can choose how you fill in the carbon footprint calculator. It's geared up to help you calculate your personal carbon footprint, but it asks you how many people you live in your house. So if you only put that one person lives in your house, all of your energy bills will be attributed to you. But if you put in multiple members, then those energy bills will be split across the different members of the household. So I am on a green renewable tariff, but I don't have any PV. Now, so it asks the type of property that you live in. That makes a big difference to your energy bills. There's a lot of assumptions that can be made. So, I mean, the fact that I live in an end terrace house means, sadly, that I lose more of my energy through my walls because I don't have neighbors either side. We have 1 bedroom and we run on mains gas.
Alana, can I just chip in? Certainly the view I'm getting of your screen is quite small. I don't know if there's any way you can make it larger, or maybe that's my view.
I've made mine a lot bigger by I went into the settings and
Has that helped? I've zoomed in a bit. Yeah, okay, I'm getting nods. All right,
That's
sorry.
better.
I have it on my main monitor, which is a wide monitor, so I think that was the issue. Okay. All right, so my windows are secondary, no, sorry, they're double glazed. There we go. And so we have solid walls and they're partly insulated. So I'll say solid walls because we're partly insulated, but leaning towards the less insulated. But we do have loft insulation. We do have a good bit of loft insulation, and we are fairly drafty. So as I'm filling this in, the sorts of things that it's asking me about are a pretty good indication of the sorts of things that you can do to actually reduce your carbon emissions. And part of the way that we've designed the calculator is we ask you questions that will help us to make recommendations for you to take action at the end. So some of the actions are going to be more complicated, like insulating your walls, but we have actually included some questions which you'll come to, particularly when it comes to food, which are, you know, maybe less impactful in terms of the amount of emissions that you'll save, but it means that there should be something for everyone at the end of it that you can sort of commit to doing that will have some impact. If I continue, I have to admit we keep it cool, not very cool. We do keep the living rooms warmer, so rather than heating the whole house evenly. And we do try and heat the house only in the mornings and evenings, but working from home, the gap in between has definitely got shorter. But we have a rule, it does go off at least in the middle of the day for some time. So I have a short shower. We don't have any solar water heating. And I'm gonna whip through some of these fairly quickly now. We do turn off the lights, mostly. We do check the energy efficiency ratings, but amongst other things. Now, so we're getting to shopping and transport, and you have some choices to make here. So you can choose how you fill in the calculator. You can either, as I said before, go and get your bills, and you could, you know, look at your bank statement, for example, for the last 12 months, and look at all of the purchases and make a calculation, you know, near exactly on how much you've spent on all of these different things. If you want to know exactly what your carbon footprint was, to the best of your knowledge, obviously, it's still an estimate, but for the last 12 months. You can also choose to take an average over a longer period, say for 5 years, which is actually what I'm going to do here. But the question is, in a typical month, how much do you spend on these things? So in a typical month, we don't spend too much on these things. I'm going to say, so clothing and toiletries, personal items. In a typical month, I'm going to say we spend at most £40. Hotel stays, eating out, pubs and takeaways. So if I'm averaging this over 5 years and I'm including, hotel stays, you know, we might go away for a week a year, and we eat out, you know, semi-regularly. So I'm going to say on a typical month, averaged across a year, I'm going to say that's £100. But we don't spend much on sport, recreation, arts and entertainment, but I am going to include my Netflix subscription in here. So I'm going to estimate that's £15. So furniture, electrical appliances and cars. Until this year, not much. If I was doing a 5-year average, we haven't bought a car for a very long time. This year, however, we've had to replace our fridge and our washing machine. So my average for this is definitely has gone up. So in a typical year, I'm going to say at the moment we would spend, well, averaging it out across the 5 years, I'm going to say maybe £400. We don't spend too much on electronic items. Over the last 5 years, I think we've replaced one phone. We've bought a second-hand laptop. So I don't think I'm going to count that, because I think it doesn't have the same carbon emissions as having bought a new laptop. I'm going to say on average £300 here. And we do, but we do buy gifts, and we buy some books. So in a typical year, I'm going to estimate that is £200. So do I travel by car? I don't typically travel by car. My other half does sometimes, but I do the vast majority of my journeys by bike or by foot. I do regularly walk. I don't travel by bus. I don't travel by train. Now, I'm going to take, again, I'm going to do a 5-year average. So I don't take many short haul flights, but I'm going to estimate that I take a flight back to Australia, a long haul flight, every other year. So on average, I would then probably be taking, because this is one way, you count each leg one way, I'm going to say that's one flight a year. So that would be one return flight every 2 years. And my diet, so I don't eat that much meat. I do waste some food, I try not to. And you remember I said some questions aren't necessarily about the impact. So these ones about chocolate and about crisps, they're not the biggest impact things that you can do when it comes to reducing your food emissions. That really is, you know, eating less meat and eating less cheese are the big ones that you can do. But actually, I'm on a health kick at the moment, so I don't actually eat any of those. I do have a vice for coffee. Yeah, I would have on an average day at least 2, but I don't have any milk. Oh, I'm gonna have to zoom out again. Hopefully you can all see that. And so this is my carbon footprint. So, you know, what you can see is that comparatively, my home energy is lower. My food, travel are the higher ones. And the travel will be primarily because I fly back to Australia. And the food probably because I still eat meat. That will be why that is a little bit higher. And shopping, that'll probably be the new fridge. But as I said, so the main goal with this calculator is actually to help and, you know, empower people to take action. So if I click through to personal goals, it's got my 1-year goal and it's got my 10-year goal. And if I click here, it's got a little bit of information about why we chose those goals. So if you remember, I was saying we have this net zero by 2050 target. Well, the Committee on Climate Change has broken that down to interim goals as well. So the first year, 3% reduction, by 2030, a 33% reduction, and then 100% reduction by 2050. So those are the goals that we have set for people, so that it's also an achievable pathway to change, not just for us as a country, but for us as individuals, because we can't reduce emissions overnight. It's got to be a gradual process. So the final step, once you calculate your carbon footprint, hopefully, is to take action. So you'll notice when you click through that it gives you options in 2 key areas. So measuring and reducing emissions, and also demonstrating climate leadership. So you'll see that it's actually automatically selected some actions for me. So it's suggesting that I heat my house to a lower temperature and only when I need it, and replace white goods with extra efficient models. Sorry, shall I zoom in again? It's probably a bit hard to see. Hopefully that's better. And so there's a little bit more information on why you might want to take those actions when you look at the little green eyes. And it also gives a star rating as well, so that you can see, you know, which actions are going to have more impact than others. And it's suggested joining or starting a carpool. Actually, I think this is remembering my answers from earlier. I think these aren't fresh. I maybe should have cleared my cookies. And there are actions for food and for shopping. And so it will automatically suggest one in each area for you, but you can pick one or as many as you like. If you want to, you could tick them all. I wouldn't recommend ticking them all. I would recommend picking the ones that are achievable and sort of focusing on those. And so it will ask you to select measures for reducing your emissions and also something for demonstrating climate leadership. I mean, that's something that we think is quite important at CCF, that, you know, it's important that we do what we can. But I guess coming back to what Jeff said earlier, actually starting the conversation is incredibly important as well. And you can't put a star rating on that in terms of what carbon emissions will be reduced, you know, because of a conversation that you've had. But actually, you know, the more that we do those sorts of things, the more that we, you know, encourage others around us to start to reduce their emissions as well. And then, yes, finally, you would pledge to take action. And on the next page, it will give you a summary of what your selected actions are. And you can sign the Cambridge Climate Change Charter and pledge to take those actions. And you can also, I forgot to show you this, you can also download a copy of your carbon footprint as well. So you can keep a record of where you are now, and you can look at that again in, say, 12 months' time and see how you've got on, how much of an impact the actions that you have taken, your pledge actions, how much impact that's had in reducing your carbon footprint. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. And I wonder if anyone has any questions.
We've had a little discussion about heat pumps.
I'm just seeing that. And it looks like there's been a recommendation for an organisation to help calculate the emissions for churches and non-profits. So maybe let me ask you a question, and you can put your answer in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and respond. But what surprised you as I went through the carbon footprint calculator, or what was interesting or noteworthy about it?
Perhaps I should say, Ruth Lambert is asking, would a new Zoom business be carbon reducing?
A new Zoom business. Ruth, do you want to, I'm not sure. Do you mean a new online business, which is all electronic?
Yeah.
So if it was just a sort of service-based business conducted at home and just sort of, you know, meetings online.
Yeah.
Carbon reducing. I mean, it would be a low carbon way to do business if you're not traveling, and if you're able to, you know, if you're not buying goods and services or selling goods and services, that would be, you know, less carbon intensive than other business models, perhaps. Is that?
I'm just thinking that Zoom has helped us to throughout this COVID lockdown, and anything that depends on flights has been halted. For example, tourism, for example, conferences, for example, physical meetings. So the carbon footprint must be hugely reduced for the amount of travel that people are not doing. But they can meet, and are these Zoom meetings or virtual education or virtual tourism or virtual conferences making a massive contribution to us living more sustainably?
Definitely. I mean, as much as COVID has, I mean, it's upended everything really, hasn't it? And that's been hugely negative. But there have been, yeah, we have learned to do things virtually in a way that we have not before. And I think we had the tools, but I think we've got pretty comfortable with them. So I do think that, you know, I think it has made the case for traveling less for businesses much easier than it was before. I mean, that was definitely a real sticking point for a lot of businesses previously, academics as well. It was a real issue. There was a huge expectation that you would have to travel to different events and travel to meet clients, that you know, getting face to face was something which just had to be done. And I think that culturally that will shift, or has shifted, and it will be interesting to see to what extent that remains. I mean, I think there will be some people keen to get back together again, face to face, but you know, it seems at this stage like it would be less. I noticed, Jennifer, I think you were indicating maybe you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, it seems to be that quite a lot of the carbon footprint that you were going through was to do with what we buy in our shopping. Yeah. So, I mean, how much of the carbon footprint is down to the things that we're getting, and then actually you can choose between having an organic cotton shirt and a non-organic cotton shirt, can't you? The actual choices you make when you're shopping make a big difference as well, don't they?
Absolutely. You know, there's the choices that you make, and we didn't go into this so much, but when you're making those choices, you know, how the thing is actually produced, so what the materials are made of, you know, as you say, organic, not organic, makes a difference, particularly in terms of cotton, in terms of how much water is used, as well as in terms of how much carbon. So organic in that respect is typically, you know, has a lower water footprint and a lower carbon footprint. The choices that we make, you know, you would also want to be looking at how far it's had to travel. So that's particularly relevant in terms of food. So, you know, if you're looking for food, buying something which has been grown and produced locally is going to have a lower carbon footprint compared to something which has been flown, you know, air freighted from South America, say. So, you know, those sorts of, that's what you would think about when you are buying things. Also thinking about how you're going to use the thing. So, you know, having just bought a fridge, you know, one of the things which I did look at was the energy rating of it. So, you know, and a fridge which is more energy efficient is going to have a lower carbon footprint in the long run than a fridge, you know, which is less efficient. So yeah, there are all sorts of things to think about when purchasing, and you know, as I sort of alluded to, buying secondhand as well.
You were mentioning shopping choices, and in relation to food, there's a really good film that's just come out, based in Cambridgeshire, about regenerative farming, and which is a much greener and more carbon-friendly method of producing food. So, I mean, if people have a look at that, it speaks for itself, really. So, I think who's done it? Cambridge.
Cambridge. I'll put a link to it.
I forget now, but it's available online. It's free, so if people want to watch it, it's really impressive. I think it's called. What's it called? Does anyone know what it's called?
The organisation is Carbon Neutral Cambridge. I'll put a link, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's a really good film, and it shows what a big difference the method of production can make. Because I feel it is, you know, a bigger responsibility on us all in relation to food, that we make better choices, not only from the carbon point of view, but from the biodiversity point of view as well. You know, we get the environment we pay for, basically.
Yeah. Other questions, Tom?
So Ellen's got some interesting comments about shopping. Do you want to unmute Ellen and put those to us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, I don't know whether I missed it in the sections about shopping that you showed in the calculator, but it seemed to be more focused on the types of produce that you buy rather than like how they're packaged or where you shop particularly. And that's something I've been trying to figure out this year, is like where to actually buy produce from. Like the supermarkets, obviously everything seems to be wrapped in plastic, but it's seems to be juggling cost versus I guess buying from somewhere that has more sustainable methods, but then also understanding whether the companies that claim that they're very sustainable actually are, and how you can check that. I bought from Oddbox, and not a lot of their stuff, but some of their stuff still came in plastic, and I was quite surprised. And yeah, so I guess I just wondered if you have any tips or comments on that.
So
if you go, sorry.
Yeah.
If you go to the Cambridge market, can get to the Cambridge market on, if you're in Cambridge and you can get to the market on Sunday, you can get, there's an organic store there without, you can get it without packaging, etc. So.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And another one, I think they're on the markets. I'm not sure if they're on Sunday, but Full Circle in Cambridge, they do deliveries as well, and they've opened a shop in the last year, do a lot of packaging free products, and they deliver to quite a number of villages, at least the ones close into Cambridge. So Full Circle, I mean, practically speaking, are good ones to look out for. I mean, speaking about more broadly about plastic and packaging, it's a tricky one. I mean, plastic in general, there is a carbon footprint associated with that, but depending on what it is, it's not necessarily better or worse than other packaging. So, for example, a plastic bag could actually have a lower carbon footprint than a paper bag.
It has other problems.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely do have other problems. But if you're just looking absolutely at carbon emissions, it's not necessarily always clear cut. And the other place where that comes into, and it's probably actually more important, is when it comes to food. There is perhaps for some a case to be made for some foods that some plastic packaging actually helps to reduce food waste. And I don't think that the industry has yet caught up with ways to completely do away with plastics. So I'm not surprised that, it is tough to get away from plastics. There are some good choices locally, but you're right, it's not yet something which is kind of like a widespread option. When you go to your local supermarket, or indeed one of the
if you in quite a lot of places, like I live near Arbury Court shops, and the local greengrocer there, you can just use paper bags, and a lot of the food is produced locally. Les Barker, so put in the word for him. So Arbury Court shops, Les Barker. So if you go to local shops in your area, you might find that they're similarly, rather than going to the big supermarkets, go to the little ones.
So I can see someone was just asking me to repeat about which bag has less carbon footprint. I don't have any hard and fast rules about which one is more or less carbon intensive. It does depend. In general, I would say the bag which has the least carbon footprint is the one that you take yourself, that you already owned. Aside from that, the ones that you get in the supermarket, it depends on the type of plastic it is. It depends on, how heavy the kind of paper bag is. The best option, if you possibly can, which I think Ellen was kind of getting at, is going packaging free where you can, and getting things without the plastic or without the paper, if that's at all possible. So we're coming to the end of the session. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit afterwards, but so that we can officially wrap things up on time, I do just have a few more slides to share very briefly. So I'm going to bring my slides back up again. And I'm also going to, while I'm running through this, I'm going to launch a poll just to get your feedback on tonight. But firstly, obviously, just a reminder to please calculate your carbon footprint. That's the address for the calculator there, cambridgecarbonfootprint.org//calculator. I would encourage you to all please go and, if you haven't already, obviously calculate your carbon footprint, and encourage other people to do it. You know, I genuinely believe that it is actually a really useful tool for people to help understand where their emissions are coming from and to find out ways to reduce them that make sense to you personally. I would also just say we do have an event coming up which you might find useful. So if you've gone and calculated your carbon footprint and you're looking for ways to reduce your emissions, we have an event called Your Carbon Footprint Question Time. And we've actually got speakers across the 4 areas of the carbon footprint, so covering food, home energy, travel, and shopping. And these speakers will be just talking about their personal experiences of working through those 4 areas of the carbon footprint and looking at what they could personally do. So it'll be a case study in what they have been able to achieve. And that is it, actually. One final plug. If you enjoyed this evening's event, if you like the work that we do, please do consider making a donation to Cambridge Carbon Footprint. On our website, it's cambridgecarbonfootprint.org/donate. And that is it. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. My email address is up on the screen there. It's alana@cambridgecarbonfootprint.org. But I will stick around for a few more minutes if there are any further questions.
That was great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, I just joined really late, and I was wondering whether you had the slides somewhere, just to like quick wrap up to have a look at them.
So I can send the slides, and there will also be a recording. So
okay, that's
once
great.
the recording is up on YouTube in the next couple of days, I will send an email around to everyone who registered for this evening, and it will have a link to the video, the slides, and also to the chat. And so I should also say thank you to my other speakers. So thank you to Jeff Harvey for your remarks at the beginning. It was nice to hear what you and what South Cambs have been up to in relation to climate. Thank you to Tom, who's been very helpful on the chat and doing all sorts of technical wizardry behind the scenes. There was unfortunate Zoom bombing incident yesterday, so Tom's done lots of preparations to make sure that tonight all went smoothly. So thank you very much to Tom for all of that. And thank you to South Cambs for organising the fortnight of events, and particularly to Emma Dyer, who has done a great job at finding a really interesting range of different speakers on climate and the environment. So thank you to everyone. So Tom, were there any other questions or?
Well, if people are still looking in chat, there's some interesting other suggestions. Laura was suggesting ethical consumer, good place to look. And they have some good stuff on the website as well.
Yes, and Laura Howarth is talking about the Mike Berners-Lee book. I'm guessing that's probably How Bad is Bananas, which does have a bunch of great statistics about the relative impacts of lots of different everyday items. And bananas, not so bad. Tropical fruit, but they get shipped, over the seas. So, yeah, you can eat bananas.
I actually, I was wondering about fish, because there was this BBC show where they showed like a menu. There were different celebrities, and I don't know if you mentioned it already earlier in the session, but they mentioned fish, and I find there is really limited selection of fish if you want to go low carbon. Yeah, thoughts on that?
So shellfish are good in general. So shellfish like mussels that can be grown on ropes, and so that you know, they don't need to go out into the ocean to collect them. But I agree that there's quite a lot of problem with the sustainability of both farmed and wild fish.
Yes, I mean, it's not an area I know huge amounts about, aside from the fact that it is very difficult, and that, yeah, you've got the issues around fishing stocks and you know, sort of wild fish, but farming fish is, as I understand it, quite energy intensive. So it is difficult to get low carbon fish. It's, you know, obviously it's good in one sense in that you don't have the methane that you do with ruminants, but it's, yeah, if it's energy intensive in the way that it's farmed, then it's yeah, difficult.
Line or mackerel is really low carbon because it's caught inshore, and it's very seasonal. Not quite there. Later in the summer, there'll be lots coming up from Cornwall.
Thank you.
Well, I think if there aren't any further questions, then I will thank you all for coming. Really interesting chat, and I appreciate that you all did contribute and put lots of interesting things in the chat as well. So we will circulate that along with the video and with the slides to everyone who's booked. So look out for that in your inbox in the next couple of days.